ever run into someone and they just, I don't know, they just have this way about them, like they can keep a conversation going effortlessly?
Yeah.
You walk away and you're like, wow, that was a really great chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is their secret?
Well, it is kind of a fascinating question. And I think the interesting thing is it's not necessarily some magical inborn ability.
Right.
It often boils down to techniques.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we're going to sort of unlock today, right?
Yeah,
Like, what makes conversations truly engaging?
absolutely. I think it can feel sometimes like, oh, some people are just natural conversationalists,
Right.
but often it's some really kind of straightforward methods they're using. And we're going to talk about things like really listening to what someone's saying, asking the right kinds of questions that really open up a discussion, and even things like mirroring.
Yeah, and mirroring.
Yeah.
And it's funny because these aren't just kind of abstract ideas, right? These are tools that you can use that can shift what sometimes feels like those awkward kind of, what do I say, next moments
Yeah.
into real connection. Whether you're meeting new people, catching up with friends, even on a date.
So whether you're at a party or on a date or even just hanging out with friends, get ready to level up your conversation game.
Yeah.
Let's jump in. Good conversations can really open doors, build stronger relationships, and just make a really positive, lasting impression. But, anything that's really worthwhile, that saying, it doesn't just happen by luck, right? You've got to build it with skill and maybe a little bit of practice, being mindful.
Absolutely. And, at the heart of it all, it's something very simple.
Hmm.
It's active listening,
Right.
which is so much more than just sort of waiting for your turn to jump in with your own thoughts.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us, we think we're good listeners.
Right. We all think that.
We all think we are, right. But what does it really, truly mean to actively listen to somebody?
It really involves giving your full, complete focus to the person who's speaking, trying to understand not just their words, but also the emotions behind those words, the full message they're trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And then, crucially, responding in a way that shows that you've been paying attention and that you understand what they've said.
So why should you, the listener, why should you really focus on doing that? What's in it for you, right?
Well, for one thing, it shows respect for the other person.
Right.
And that goes a long way in building any kind of relationship. It also reduces the chances of misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Because you're actually taking the time to process what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, it enriches the interaction, makes it more meaningful for both of you.
So what are some things that we can actually do to be better active listeners? Like, what are some really tangible, concrete actions we can take when we're in conversation with somebody?
Yeah, there are a few things. Maintaining appropriate eye contact. That signals you're engaged, that you're present in the conversation, nodding occasionally, just simple things like that. It shows that you're following along. Here's a really important one.
Okay.
Try paraphrasing, summarizing what the other person just said before you add your own perspective.
Oh, interesting.
That's a way of checking to make sure that you've understood them correctly.
Right.
And then finally, asking relevant follow-up questions.
Okay.
Shows that you're genuinely interested in learning more about what they're sharing.
I think that's so helpful to sort of give people, some concrete actions that they can take. So what would it look like, for example, if someone wasn't actively listening? Can we give like a real world scenario?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Like, picture this. Person A is sharing, and they say, I've been feeling really overwhelmed with work lately, just juggling all these deadlines, new projects. A passive listener, let's call them person B, might immediately jump in with, oh, tell me about it. My workload has been absolutely insane too.
Yeah.
You see how that just shifts the focus back to person B and doesn't really acknowledge what person A just said?
Right. It's like they're just waiting to talk about themselves. So then in that same scenario, what would it look like if person B was actively listening?
A good listener, in that case, might say something like, that sounds really challenging. What's been the most overwhelming aspect of it for you lately?
Right.
Acknowledging the feelings and inviting them to elaborate further, it shows genuine interest.
You can really feel the difference between the two. It's just about making the other person feel heard and really understood.
Exactly. And that kind of leads to the key takeaway here.
Yeah.
When you dedicate your attention to listening, the speaker feels valued. And then what happens is the conversation naturally deepens.
Right.
It encourages them to open up and share more authentically.
That makes sense. So we're really focused on hearing what people are saying.
Yeah.
What's the next step we can take?
Okay, so we're really listening. The next important technique is the art of asking open-ended questions.
Okay.
So think of a good conversation as a back and forth, a dynamic exchange,
Hmm.
almost like a tennis match, right? You want to keep the ball in play. And open-ended questions are like those gentle serves that encourage a really substantial return,
Okay.
whereas closed-ended questions kind of bring that rally to an abrupt halt.
I love that tennis analogy. It's
Yeah.
a good way to visualize it. So why is it so important for us, the listener, the person who wants to get better at conversations, to really use those open-ended questions?
Well, they elicit more than just a yes or no answer. They invite the other person to actually share more about their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences. It
Yeah.
makes them feel valued
Right.
because you're demonstrating that genuine curiosity about their perspective.
Yeah.
And that leads to more engaging conversations and deeper connections for everyone involved.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how we can switch up? Sometimes we ask those questions that just kind of shut things down, right?
Right.
So how do we switch it up? How do we make it more open-ended?
So instead of asking, did you enjoy the book?
Right.
Which is likely to get you a one-word answer,
Yeah.
try phrasing it as, what were some of your key takeaways from the book?
Okay.
Or, are you busy this weekend? Could
Yeah.
become,
Yeah.
what are your plans for this weekend? Notice how the second question kind of invites a more elaborate response?
Yeah, it's like you're just opening it up for them to share more of their world.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
just opens it up. Like, for example, if someone asks you, did you have a good day?
Uh-huh.
You might just say, yeah, it was fine.
Right.
But if they say, what was the best part of your day?
Hmm.
You're more likely to say, oh, well, actually, I had this really interesting meeting and we were brainstorming ideas and I felt really energized by it.
Yeah.
And that gives you something to build on.
Right.
You can ask about those ideas.
Yeah.
Why was the meeting so energizing?
Yeah.
So it just really opens it up.
So the key insight there is that open-ended questions really keep that conversation flowing,
Yes,
and they create more opportunities to connect on a deeper level.
absolutely. So let's move on to a more subtle but really powerful technique, mirroring and matching.
Mirroring and matching. I like that. I think that could be very powerful. So what exactly does that look like in a conversation?
It's subtly adopting some of the other person's verbal and nonverbal cues. So think about it. We naturally feel more comfortable around people who we perceive as being similar to us.
Right.
So by mirroring someone's tone of voice, their body language, their level of enthusiasm, you can build this almost unconscious rapport and connection.
And why does that work so well? Why is that such an important thing to do if we want to have better conversations?
It just helps people feel more at ease, more understood in your presence. It can also establish rapport relatively quickly, often below the level of conscious awareness. And it contributes to the conversation feeling just kind of smoother, more natural.
Like you're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we do that? How do we mirror and match in practical ways?
Yeah.
What are some things we can do?
Well, if someone is speaking in a really kind of calm and quiet manner, you probably don't want to respond in a really loud and boisterous tone. So you want to try to match their kind of pace and volume. If they use hand gestures a lot to emphasize their points,
Uh-huh.
you can subtly incorporate similar gestures into your own communication.
Okay.
If their language is really casual, informal, you might want to avoid using overly formal or technical language in your response.
It's about aligning yourself with the other person.
Exactly.
Can you give us an example of a scenario where this would be particularly useful? Like maybe a situation that we've all been in?
Sure. Imagine you're talking to someone who's very enthusiastic about a particular topic.
Yeah.
And their eyes are wide, they're leaning forward, they're really into it.
Right.
You can mirror that by leaning in slightly yourself,
Okay.
matching their energy level with your voice, reflecting those kind of excited facial expressions.
Got it.
Nodding along can also reinforce that you're sharing their excitement.
So it sounds like a really useful technique. Is there a point, though, where it can become kind of less effective or maybe even counterproductive?
Yeah, the key is to be subtle. If your mirroring is too obvious,
Right.
it can come across as really insincere or even mocking.
Yeah, no one wants that.
No,
No.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that can actually damage the rapport you're trying to build. So the key is to be natural, to be genuine in your responses.
Mm-hmm.
You're not trying to become a carbon copy of the other person.
Right. You're not doing an impression.
Exactly.
So the takeaway here is that mirroring and matching, when it's done in a subtle way, it creates that feeling of being understood. Like you're really on the same page with someone.
Exactly.
So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about bringing in some humor.
Okay. Yes.
So how do we use humor in our conversations to really enhance them?
Laughter is fantastic for making conversations more enjoyable, more memorable, and it can be a really great icebreaker in situations that might feel a little awkward.
Right.
It can ease tension in conversations that are maybe a little bit difficult. It just creates that more positive and engaging atmosphere.
So it's not about being like a stand-up comedian or anything like that?
No, no, not at all. The goal is to keep it lighthearted,
Yeah.
to make sure it's appropriate for the context,
Right.
for your relationship with the other person. Avoid humor that could be offensive,
Right.
mean-spirited, or too personal, especially with people you don't know very well. Self-deprecating humor is often very effective because it makes you relatable and approachable.
Yeah.
And always read the room. Some situations just aren't right for jokes.
Right. So can you give us an example of how humor can be used, effectively in a conversation?
Sure. Let's say someone says, I've been trying to get into this exercise routine, but it's such a struggle to stay motivated.
Yeah.
You could respond in a lighthearted way like, oh, I totally get it. My current workout plan mainly consists of lifting the TV remote.
Yeah.
It's self-deprecating, it's relatable, and it adds a little bit of fun to the conversation.
I love that. So the main point there is that humor is most effective when it feels natural and it's appropriate for the situation for the other person. Okay, now let's talk about storytelling because I think we all know, everybody loves a good story.
Yeah, we love stories.
So what makes them so powerful? Why do we love them so much?
Well, think about it. Facts and figures can be forgotten easily,
Right.
but stories tend to stay with us.
Yeah.
They resonate on a much deeper level. They make conversations more lively, more relatable. They help others connect with you emotionally, and that makes the interaction much more impactful.
So instead of just presenting dry information, we can turn it into a story. How do we do that effectively, though, in a conversational way?
The key is to keep them concise. Keep them relevant to the flow of the conversation. Don't ramble on.
Okay.
Make sure you incorporate your emotions.
Uh-huh.
Share how you felt during the experience you're describing,
Hmm.
and use vivid details to paint a picture in the listener's mind.
Okay.
That makes it much more engaging and memorable.
So can we give an example of how we would turn just a really basic statement into something more engaging, more of a story?
Sure, instead of just saying, I had a really chaotic morning,
Right.
you could say something like, this morning was like a comedy of errors.
Right.
First, my alarm decided to take a vacation. I woke up in a total panic, realized I was late. Then I was trying to make coffee and toast at the same time, which resulted, of course, in burnt toast and lukewarm coffee.
Yeah.
And as I was rushing out the door, I tripped over the cat.
Yeah.
It was one of those mornings where I just had to laugh. Otherwise, I might have just cried into my burnt toast.
I love that. So it really just makes it so much more vivid.
Yeah.
Makes you feel like you're in that moment with the person. And it's so much more interesting than just saying, oh, my morning was bad.
Exactly.
So the takeaway here is that good storytellers, they can take everyday occurrences and they can turn them into something much more entertaining, much more engaging.
Absolutely. Let's move on now to a slightly more nuanced but incredibly important skill. Reading the room.
Okay, reading the room. It sounds like it's about being very aware of the social dynamics of a situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's those unspoken cues.
Right.
The really great conversationalists, they develop a keen sense for when a topic just isn't working, or when someone in the group is maybe feeling uncomfortable or disengaged,
Right.
and they know how to kind of gracefully steer the conversation in a different direction.
So why is that so important? Why is it so important for us to be able to read the room? What's the benefit?
Well, it ensures that the conversation remains positive and engaging for everybody. It helps you avoid potential awkwardness or discomfort.
Right.
It really shows a high level of social awareness, that you're attuned to how other people are feeling.
So how do we actually read the room? What are some things that we should look out for?
Well, you want to pay attention to nonverbal cues,
Okay.
facial expressions,
Mm-hmm.
body language. Are people leaning in? Are they making eye contact, indicating that they're engaged?
Right.
Or are they looking away, fidgeting, looking bored or uncomfortable?
Right.
If you sense that someone's uneasy about a topic, maybe gracefully transition to something else.
Okay.
If a topic you introduce doesn't generate much enthusiasm, don't force it. Just kind of ask about something else entirely.
Can you give us an example of how someone would successfully change the subject?
Imagine someone's really excitedly talking about something. It's a little bit controversial,
Okay.
but the other people are exchanging kind of uneasy glances.
Yeah.
They're looking uncomfortable.
Right.
Instead of just plowing on, the speaker Noticing this discomfort might say, okay, well, enough about my opinions on that. What have you guys been up to lately? Anything exciting happening?
Yeah, okay.
It's a really natural way to kind of shift the focus.
So the takeaway here is that conversations, they should feel natural.
Yeah,
And being able to read the room and adjust is how you keep that positive flow going.
exactly. And finally, let's explore the power of compliments and positivity in conversations.
Okay, yeah. Making people feel good. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward.
Guessing.
Why is that so important, though?
Well, offering genuine compliments, maintaining a positive outlook, it can really leave a lasting impression on the people you talk to.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, it makes the conversation more uplifting and enjoyable for everyone.
Right. Everybody wins.
Yeah, exactly. It helps people feel good about themselves, which makes them feel good about interacting with you. And it can be really powerful in strengthening those connections.
So how do we offer compliments? How do we inject that positivity in an effective way?
Well, be specific with your compliments.
Right.
Instead of a generic, "That's nice,"
Right.
you could say something like, "I really admire how you approach that problem."
Right.
Or, "Your explanation of that data was so clear and well-structured. I really appreciate that." Make sure your compliments are genuine, though.
Yeah, people can tell.
People can tell.
You can tell when it's not sincere.
Forced compliments have the opposite effect.
Right.
And try to steer the conversation towards positive topics, frame things in an optimistic light.
So give us a real example. Like, what would be a really good example of a really specific compliment versus something that's just kind of generic?
So instead of just saying, "I liked your presentation," you could say, "Your explanation of that complex data was so clear, so well-structured. I really appreciate that."
Mhm.
The second compliment is much more impactful because it highlights a specific skill
Right.
and it feels more sincere.
I love that. So the main thing is people really remember how you make them feel.
Absolutely.
And a little bit of genuine positivity in those thoughtful compliments can go such a long way in creating positive memories and making conversations so much better. Well, I think we've learned so much.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
So many great techniques.
Yes. So many actionable techniques to really elevate our conversations.
Absolutely. And the key thing is to remember that conversation is a two-way street.
It is.
Both people need to be engaged, contributing.
Absolutely. So it's time to put all these skills to work. Next time you're talking to someone, maybe consciously try asking an open-ended question, weaving in one of those engaging stories we talked about,
Oh, yeah.
or simply just focus on listening with that genuine curiosity. I think you'll be surprised by how much better the conversation flows.
You might be surprised.
Yeah.
And always remember, this is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
The more you use these techniques, the more natural they become, and the more rewarding all those interactions will be.
So go out there, spark those great conversations, and you might just become someone's favorite person to talk to.
You never know.
And now tell me, what is one conversation trick that really works well for you? Let me know.
Hey there, awesome listener. If you thought this was helpful and you want more discussions just like this, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below.